It was 150 years ago that we were in the midst of the Civil War, and there's a brand new book out talking about the Civil War. Thomas Fleming is the author. The book is called A Disease in the Public Mind, A New Understanding of Why We Fought the Civil War. Thomas Fleming, welcome to the Big 550 KTRS here in St. Louis.
Well, I'm delighted to be with you. It's a subject that has absorbed me for 5 years or so, and I'm eager to talk about it.
Well, I'll make the notion that we never really understood the first reason why we fought the Civil War. So now we have a new understanding. Tell us.
That's what I'm really trying to say. The summary of why we fought the Civil War is slavery. Everybody, so many people just say that's the answer. But it's much more complicated than that. And I think that the mere fact of owning slaves has become such an evil thing to do, which certainly I agree with the fact that slavery was an evil institution. But he himself said when he became president, he didn't know how to end slavery any more than anybody else did. And it was going to require patience and negotiation and understanding on both sides, but I'm afraid this was sadly lacking.
The argument goes, if I remember my history classes correctly, that yes, the Civil War was about ending slavery, and then somebody will chime in, no, it's an issue of states' rights, but it was the states' rights to allow slavery.
Yes, exactly. So that comes around in a full circle and gets us nowhere. What we're really talking about in this book is the long, deep hatred that slowly grew between the North and the South. In the beginning, it had very little to do with slavery. One of the things, for instance, that really aroused the North's hatred of the South was Thomas Jefferson's embargo, which goes all the way back to Thomas Jefferson's presidency in 1805 and 6, when we were threatened with war with England. They were seizing our ships at sea and so forth. And Jefferson announced, we're not going to go to war. We're going to have an embargo. We won't trade with the British or the French, and we'll see what happens. He thought they would force them to cut some kind of a deal with him. It didn't. Instead, it destroyed the economy of the northern part of the United States. Over 40,000 seamen were milling around in the seaports. And in New England, where most of the ships came from, there were people going bankrupt by the dozen. And that's when they began to think, these people are the enemy, these Southerners, Jefferson and his followers.
So you're telling me that, and how far does this go, Tom Fleming? The book is called A Disease in the Public Mind, A New Understanding of Why We Fought the Civil War. Are you telling me that if there was a little more trust and a little less hatred, they would have been able to find a peaceful resolution to the slave question?
Yes, I am saying that, McGraw, because other people did it. We're the only nation in the whole world that fought a murderous civil war to end slavery. And of all people, the British, whom we, sort of specialize in looking down on for a long time, since we kicked them out of the country to become independent, the British freed almost 1 million slaves in the West Indies peacefully by compensating their owners. It cost them a lot of money, but it was much better than fighting a bloody, bloody war. And Lincoln tried to get the South and the North to talk about this when he became president. And he could not get them to overcome these two antagonisms that had grown up between them. Especially by the time we got to the Civil War, to 1860, the North had acquired a religious attitude. Slavery was a sin, and there were preachers saying that the South was an evil reincarnation of the great dragon of Revelation. They were trying to destroy destroy freedom, not just in the South, but in the North too. It was you just when you start. There was a famous senator from Massachusetts. Just to give you an idea of what we're up against here, with this famous senator from Massachusetts, Charles Sumner, he gave a roaring speech up in Boston, and he ended it with, "Are you for slavery or for freedom? Are you for God or the devil?" Now, how can you reason with somebody like that?
Thomas Fleming, the book is called A Disease in the Public Mind, A New Understanding of Why We Fought the Civil War. This is really interesting. Because we to sort of, I guess, add to your premise or to sort of help understand it.
Sure.
The North, as you said, was godlike and willing to abolish slavery, but they were just as racist and just as they didn't want to give up their slaves. The majority, it seems like, liked the slaves and liked the system they were living in.
They did, that's true, but the North did legally abolish slavery in almost all the states. However, they treated the blacks as if they were still slaves. They were all totally segregated. Nobody had a right to the vote. To give you an example of how bad this was, at the end of the Civil War, they took a vote in Connecticut to decide whether the blacks, who were now freed, the ones who lived in Connecticut, could vote. The white majority said no. This is after we killed 1 million men in the Civil War to end slavery. So there were these very negative attitudes. There's no doubt about it towards that was you might say, a separate disease in the public mind. This feeling that the Negro was inferior and not equal to be able to handle the rights of voting as a free man.
The other thing that I find fascinating as you study the Civil War, Tom Fleming, the book is A Disease of the Public Mind, is that at the end of the war, the South was decimated. They were running out of men. They were running out of equipment. They were running out of everything. Did they not turn to the blacks and say, if you fight for the South, we will give you your freedom?
There were some attempts to do that, but it didn't really go anywhere because they were so divided about doing it. And you see, if they started to give guns to the blacks, that would have been the beginning. That triggered their fear of a race war. I have a chapter in the book called Thomas Jefferson's Nightmare, and this was the fear that lurked in Jefferson's soul all through his life. He wrote the Declaration of Independence, but he could not escape this feeling he had that blacks had so much resentment over slavery that if they were freed, they were going to massacre people. And when he participated in a way, partially, in encouraging the French to invade Haiti to restore French rule, and the thing ended in a disaster with the French army collapsing from yellow fever, and the black general in charge in Haiti killed every white man, woman, and child on the island. And that triggered a huge fear of a race war in the South's public mind. And this was the big barrier. But the amazing thing is that Lincoln saw that this could be overcome. He never shared this fear that there was going to be a race war if you put guns in the hands of black men. And the reason why, McGraw, is fascinating. He knew that George Washington had done this while he was the general in command of the Army during the War for Independence. Although people said he shouldn't do it, Washington accepted free black men in his army, and by the end of the Revolutionary War, 1 in every 7 men in the ranks of the Continental Army was black. And when Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he gave one of the pens to a man named Livermore, who had written a history about what Washington did for blacks while he was both president and general. And that's how much Lincoln learned from reading this book and finding out what Washington did.
A Disease in the Public Mind, A New Understanding of Why We Fought the Civil War. Thomas Fleming, our guest. Okay, Thomas Fleming, let me take the other side of this for you.
Sure.
The South, you're going to tell me, so despised the North that they would send hundreds of thousands of young men to their death just because they didn't like the North.
I don't think that's quite says it, McGraw, if I may say so.
Yeah, okay.
There was hatred there, but the hatred was rooted in this fear, and it was triggered. The ultimate explosion was triggered by a man whom I'm sure you're very familiar with named John Brown. When he raided Harper's Ferry arsenal with 100,000 rifles, his desire was to seize these rifles and arm the slaves and he had maps of all the states in the South, and he had each county identified where blacks outnumbered whites, and there were quite a few of them. And that was his plan, to march a slave army through the South and launch a race war. Brown was an absolute total abolitionist fanatic. He believed that without the emission of blood, there was no forgiveness for sin. And out in Kansas, when he was mixed up in the war fight between the South and the North that really began out there in the 1850s, he slaughtered 6 unarmed Southern men just to try to terrify the South into getting out of Kansas. He was a very, very dangerous man, and he showed that to the South, this meant that these people want to come down here and do this to us and to our wives and children. And the phrase, this is the fascinating thing to me, McGraw, that the phrase they used is, they want to inflict another Santo Domingo on us. They were talking about Haiti and that terrible disaster there.
So you're saying
that was still in the minds of the South vividly when the war began.
And so the South's wasn't necessarily defending slavery; they were defending, quote unquote, their way of life.
They were defending their way of life. They were defending their wives and children. I have the statement that General Beauregard made just before the Battle of Bull Run, and he calls on all Southern men to join in this war to defend your wives and children from monsters. He goes on, and as I say in the book, here was Thomas Jefferson's nightmare converted into a Confederate war cry.
You mentioned that Thomas Jefferson, President Lincoln, floated the idea of compensating the slave owners for their slaves to release them to become free?
Yes. The week before he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, he put before Congress a plan to gradually free all the slaves by 1890, and they were ready. He said he was ready to pay $4 billion for their freedom. And this was about what the slaves were worth. Something that we don't recognize, McGraw, as is the South was by far the richest part of the country. The abolitionists constantly propagandized that the slavery had destroyed the South and made the land poor and so forth. This was absolute nonsense. 6 out of the 10 richest states in the country in 1860 were in the South. But the amount of, I say this because the amount of money seems staggering, but this was a realistic view that Lincoln said, look, if we keep fighting this war, it's going to cost $40 billion. Let's find a peaceful solution. But the South could not tolerate it. You can't believe the things they said about Lincoln when he issued the Emancipation Proclamation.
So hold on a second, back up a second.
The fiend. They accused him of wanting to slaughter their wives and children. And Lincoln was aware when he signed this that he was risking his life.
The disease...
And it's a tragic fact that it did indeed cost him his life.
Thomas Fleming, our guest. The book is A Disease in the Public Mind, A New Understanding of Why We Fought the Civil War. Who nixed the idea of giving $4 billion to the South? Was it the South? Was it the North? They didn't have the money?
The situation never got to that, McGraw. The South absolutely refused to even consider Lincoln's offer. That's all there was to it.
Gotcha.
But here's the other side of it. The abolitionists, the ones who were saying that it was God or the devil, the ones who denounced the South as a totally evil, they used to say the South is a great Sodom, as in Sodom and Gomorrah. And though they denounced Lincoln when he offered this amount of money, they compared him to an idiotic turtle with no brain at all. One man said it was their rage and their insistence that they'd never vote for this. That had a lot to do with basically destroying Lincoln's hope. This was his last hope for a peaceful solution.
Sounds like it's a must-read, A Disease in the Public Mind. Tom, before we let you go, Tom Fleming, the author of the new book, A Disease in the Public Mind, Last summer, we were lucky enough to MC an event where we dedicated the Dred and Harriet Scott statue outside of the old courthouse here in St. Louis. How do you look at the Dred Scott case in this new prism of a new understanding of why we fought the Civil War?
Look at what, McGraw? I'm not quite...
Talk about Dred Scott for a moment and your thoughts as you wrote this book.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, Dred Scott was an attempt by the man who was the head of the Civil War, head of the Supreme Court, Roger Taney, to try to find a peaceful solution, but he found it, I fear, by denigrating the black man and saying he had no rights and he couldn't sue as court and so forth. It was a noble but utterly ridiculous and feeble attempt to use the Supreme Court's power to find a peaceful solution. The best thing you can say about Taney is that he didn't own slaves; he'd freed his own slaves. He hated slavery, but he couldn't see how the blacks could ever become truly equal.
So
he claimed that they never did have any rights under the Constitution, which is the North. The decision was basically ignored as it should have been.
Well, so what you're saying is the Dred Scott case was a test case to sort of prove slavery doesn't work and is unconstitutional, but it backfired on him?
Not to prove that slavery didn't work. He knew all too well that it worked very successfully as a business proposition, but it didn't make sense in the history that we know that there were all kinds of slaves that had rights in the North. They were able to sue in court and so forth, and so he was ignoring the history of the blacks in America when he issued that decision. He felt that they were on the brink of the Civil War, and he was desperately trying to come up with a solution. But Lincoln, of course, did not. He never countenanced the Dred Scott decision, and he in the last speech of his life, which I have in the book. This was after General Lee had surrendered. He spoke at the White House. He talked about giving the black soldiers who had fought in the war and blacks who had the right, who could read and write, they, he said, deserved to have the vote immediately, and the rest of them, once they were educated, should have the vote too. So Lincoln was refuting the Dred Scott decision right then and there you might say for the last time.
Right. Thomas Fleming, the book is going to be a great read. A Disease in the Public Mind, a new understanding of why we fought the Civil War. Thomas Fleming, thank you very much for your time. Best of luck with the book.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for this opportunity to say so much about it. I really feel I was talking to a man who had this feeling about history that I share.
Well, thank you very much, Thomas. That is very nice of you to say. Thomas Fleming, A Disease in the Public Mind. Tom, we'll talk to you down the road.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Back in a moment on the Big 550 KTRS.